Welcome back everyone to another 2D to 3D video. I am Follygon, and in this video I'm going to show you my entire digital character sculpting process from beginning to end. Click that subscribe button if you are new around here, and if you want to learn more about digital sculpting, check out gumroad.com/Follygon for all of my brushes, materials, courses, and other fun goodies. So this time around I am working on this female Cervitaur, which is like a centaur, but instead of the lower half being a horse, she's half deer. Also, a huge thank you to Yuri Chemezov for the awesome concept. Definitely check out his work. So here we are once again, starting from scratch on a new character, beginning with the block out phase of character creation. This is when we get something on the canvas quickly so we can start working on things like proportions, large shapes, primary forms, all that good stuff. The block out for this character went especially smooth, and I really enjoyed working on the earlier stages here. The early stages of character creation tend to be the most difficult, because that is where all the heavy lifting happens. Later on, adding details is easy by comparison. That is why I recommend people to do some assignments of finding some cool concepts and attempting to block them out as accurately as possible. Not only does it help with your sculpting abilities, of course, but it helps hone your artistic eye, making it easier to spot differences in the future. So like I said, this blockout went really smooth, it was a lot of fun, and I got to a happy enough place pretty quickly. Obviously, from here it needs a ton of work, so that's when I start to refine my blockout. I begin hinting at some anatomy, combining up parts like the legs and arms, adding things that I'm missing, all that good stuff. When I sculpt during this stage, and, well, really in general, I try to push things as far as I can until they start to break. Then I nudge them back slightly until they start to work again. This helps to exaggerate form and create some cool shapes that you might not have discovered without exaggeration. It's important to pay attention to silhouette at all times, but especially during the blockout and whenever you are working on primary form. If you didn't know, well, silhouette is pretty important when it comes to sculpture. I would even argue it's the most important aspect of sculpture. The reason why? Well, if things aren't lining up with your concept or your primary forms aren't looking good here now during the early stages, they sure as heck aren't going to line up and look good later on. But this isn't 2D art, right? This is 3D, and it has to not only look amazing from one single main angle here, but it also has to look great when you spin it around. If not, then why are we even 3D artists, right? If you want to learn more about making amazing characters from just a single reference image, like I'm doing right now, check out the Appeal Academy. I put a ton of work into each and every single one of my students and their progress, and if it sounds like something you are interested in, I encourage you to give it a look at the link in the description. Now for the fun part, the face, or at least the beginning stages of my progress on the face. Wow, I don't know if you guys have ever tried sculpting a face, but dang, is it hard. Well, maybe I can give you a few pointers here to make it easier in the future. If you guys watch my process here in the beginning, you'll notice that I use a lot of pinch to tighten up my angles and create sharp plane changes. The idea with this process is that we will soften our forms later on, but first we must understand how a shape is turning on the surface, especially with a softer, more feminine face like what I'm working with in this concept. The reason masculine characters tend to be easier is because they are so angular that it is easier to see where a plane changes direction. With a soft face like this, it helps to know the basic planes of the face to rough those in, and then soften later on. During this time, I am working slow, paying close attention to my reference image to line things up as best as I can now. The face is the most important part of your character, so you want to spend a long time here getting a good base to move you forward. Next up, I roughen the hair the exact same way that I blocked in the body, quickly pulling out simple primitive shapes into the basic form that I need. Remember that you need to have all the parts there before you can work on proportions. If you have nothing to compare to, well, you can't really work on proportions now, can you? The hair on top of the head is quickly sketched in using my clay brush with some pinch on the sides to indicate the change from the top of the hair to the side plane. Don't worry about things being perfect in one go. I rarely get anything perfect the first time around. That's why we work in stages as sculptors. We rough it in, refine it, and then we polish. And those stages don't happen all in 3 clean, easy steps. They are dirty, back and forth processes that often require many attempts to get to a place where you will be happy with them. Even when you call your character finished, there will always be things that you could have done to improve your piece and push it further. You can always nitpick something. For instance, the ears that I work on a little during this stage are something I return to many times until the very end of my process to even make large proportional changes. So don't be in a rush and know that it will shape up with time. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was the Statue of David. Now we have some color as well as a few updates on the face. I love starting to get some paint on my models early on. Even if it looks a little silly, I find it very helpful. You'll also notice that the face is quite far off from the concept. These things take time and I work on this face a ton during this project. I liked many of the variations I had on this face throughout working on this character, but I had to continue forward to make sure I was always moving in the direction of the concept. You can't get attached to your own work. This is why I never work with layers in ZBrush. Sure, you can undo and step back, but I rarely even do that kind of thing. I keep pushing forward on what I have until I can get it somewhere that I like. Honestly, I think layers in ZBrush slow you down quite a lot, but you can create some cool effects with them, I guess. Maybe it's something that I could play with in the next video. You're probably wondering why my character doesn't have any eyelids at this point, and that goes back to what I was talking about with getting your primary forms down first. I have to make sure the surrounding area of the eye socket and brow and nose and all that stuff is good before I can add anything else on top of that. Even though I do go back and make changes after adding the eyelids, it still saves a lot of time to get those primary shapes good first before moving forward. Next up is extracting some shapes to create the leaf clothing. Pretty simple for now, but I insert leaves later on to add more complexity to these shapes. The clothing for this character was a little undefined in areas, and that made it tough to make some decisions, especially around the chest, although for what I end up with, I think it turned out alright. I don't want to bore you all with too much technical talk here, but some of the next steps involve a process called booleans. Specifically here, I am using Dynamesh. This takes multiple parts, like my arms and body for instance, and combines them into a single piece of geometry. Think of it like taking two pieces of clay, smooshing them together, and then blending the edges where they connect. This is when I have to start softening some of my super hard plane changes as well to get a more natural and organic feeling. This is a stylized character, and because of that you have to be careful when adding any anatomical form. With the body of the deer, I used many different anatomical references for the skeleton, musculature, and surface information. But at the end of the day, if it's not in my concept, I don't want to add it unless it directly improves the character. Adding a lot of details to the body of the deer would detract attention away from the face, so I have to keep that balance in the back of my head at all times. Hey, now we have some eyelids and eyebrows, that's pretty cool. Beginning to look more human, or I guess Cervitaur. Our face is quite far off from where it needs to be still, but there were a lot of elements that I liked from this stage that I tried to bring into the final character. Most of these are eventually lost, but it gave me a good base to start from. We have some more work on the body, trying to get some secondary forms built up, thinking about where the plane changes need to happen, trying to create some cool shapes there. Lots of experimentation while staying as true to the concept as possible. Even more experimentation with the face to round it out, increase the size of the eyes, work on the shapes of the facial features. Lots of changes over time that equate to me slowly making the face skinnier as time goes on. That's a little bit of an oversimplification, but you'll see as it starts to develop. For the leaves, I create a single piece of geometry that I can turn into a brush. Then with that brush, I can apply the basic leaf all over my character's clothing. I don't immediately do that though. First I sculpt the rough shapes for the white cloth that is hanging down from her I guess sash is what you would call that? That's what I'm going to continue calling it. But now I start adding those leaves to my clothing. This is only the beginning though. When you do anything that has a repeatable pattern, whether it's a texture stamp or inserting repeatable geometry like I'm doing here, you have to take the time to add variation. Otherwise, it's very obvious that it was done through some automatic or repeatable process, and it typically doesn't look very good. Here you can see a little bit of my work on the staff. All I did for this was make a cylinder, then I sculpted on a little, and then ran a decimation on it. That's just a fancy way of saying I reduced the polygons to make it look more faceted. And then for the top of the staff, I just modeled it by hand with ZBrush's poly modeling tool, the Z Modeler brush. I tried to make the staff a bit more interesting from other angles, which changed the shape a little bit, but I still think it reads really well from the main view and ended up reading a lot better from the other views as well. In the next few clips, you'll see me working on the hair and face all together. At this point, I really just had to sit down and put in a lot of work to start getting this character to a better place. A lot of the proportions changed here. I started adding in some more shapes for the hair. I was really worried that the silhouette of the hair would be hard to capture from this angle without it looking just kind of completely silly from every other angle, but it actually worked really well. It was a lot of work though to get that to feel good, and I just show a little bit of that process here. For some of the secondary forms on the hair, I start by using my sharp soft brush. You could get a similar result with the standard brush, or maybe even the Damien standard with some tweaks to the brush fall off and Z intensity. But if you do want my brushes, they are always available for download at the link down below in the description. I pretty much always recommend people to make their own brushes though, simply because I think you can get a lot more personal customization that way to kind of figure out what works best for you. But hey, my brushes are there for download if you want them, and I've gotten a lot of really good feedback on them. My goal with this hair was to get more variation in the flow of the major forms. The hair in the concept is pretty flat and it felt too geometric, so I wanted to get some more form in there. When I work like this, I start with the softer strokes, then I go back over them with a pinch. Then I soften and blend it all together after that. Pretty simple process, but it does take a bit of time to do right. You may see me mess up the directionality of the hair a couple times and have to go back and resculpt a little bit. I already mentioned how the forms in the shirt were eluding me, so I won't say too much on that. Just that I had to get a little creative here on some of the shapes and try to make something that, well, made sense. Touching up a few more accessories, getting in that belt or sash, maybe. I'm not really sure what you call that thing. So I sculpt a few quick folds on here, and then I have to thin it out quite a lot. I didn't want it to feel super poofy or inflated. It's supposed to be a thinner fabric. Then the butterfly, which was super simple, of course, just some poly modeling on that. Always super boring to watch, so we won't linger here too long. Oh boy, it is time for my absolute favorite part. That's right, it's time for hands. And if you don't know, I really don't enjoy sculpting hands all that much. No matter how many hands I sculpt, it never feels like hands get any easier. But if you want to learn how to sculpt hands, I recently released a full 2-hour tutorial completely for free here on my YouTube channel. I'll put a link somewhere on screen so you can find it if you are interested. It's from a live stream over on the Pixelogic ZBrush channel. If you didn't know, I live stream on there every once in a while, and you can follow me on social media wherever, just at Follygon, for updates on when I'll be doing that next. So yes, hands are really tough, particularly when they are interacting with things. Lucky for me, both of my hands are interacting with something here, so yay, that's awesome. But that is why I practice them as often as I can. The more you sculpt something, obviously, the better you're going to get at it. Here's a part that I hope you will really enjoy. This owl really took no time at all, but he is super cute. I had a ton of fun making him. Later on, I add a little texture so that he isn't so flat. I didn't want to go overboard with feathers though, as that wasn't something in the reference. I try to keep things as close as possible, but sometimes that isn't always a reality. A lot of the time, it is not the intention of the original artist to ever see their work in 3D, and because of that, not everything is perfectly accounted for, whether that be perspective cheating or something not being very well defined or anything else. A lot of you are probably familiar with this part of the process. It's a default plugin called Transpose Master. I use it specifically for posing most of the time. It doesn't do much, it just allows you to move all of your subtools at once instead of needing to do that individually. I wanted to get the arms into position first, and then later I'll start posing the rest of the body. Here for the tail, it's pretty much the same process as up on the hair, rough in some of the shapes and direction of the strokes, doing some pinching, and then softening it back out. My advice for hair or fur is to just take your time with it. Plan out your strokes, and if you mess them up, just smooth them back out and try again. Some quick sculpting around the neck. I try to get that looking better. Kind of tough to work with that because it's a little thin. I try to avoid thin geometry if possible. Brushes can get really confused with that sort of thing. It has to do with how they sample the surface. You can make it a little better though by turning on backface masking, which you can find in the brush menu under auto masking. More subtle changes to the face. It might not seem like a lot right now, but if you look at the entire evolution of the face throughout this whole process, it has changed quite a bit since its inception. As I pointed out before, at each stage it's slowly getting thinner and closer to that concept. I won't show too much of the process on the ponytail because you've already seen this twice now on the top of the head and the deer tail, so it's pretty much the same exact thing here. I will say, however, that when you're sculpting, if things are a little tough to see or you're having trouble there, try changing your material. I turn off all my poly paint and go back to my Follygon clay material, which is my custom material that I use for sculpting. Changing your material just helps to see things in a new light, sometimes literally, I guess, but it's good to refresh your eyes every now and again if you can. I mentioned the changes in pose were coming soon. That's what I'm doing now, using Transpose Master once again to essentially work on a proxy for those that are familiar. The pose is fairly simple, so it didn't require a ton of large changes. I've mentioned before that if you have a really extreme pose, like on my athletic girl sculpt, then you are typically best to start in that pose from the very beginning. When you're working on a character in a neutral state, like a T pose or an A pose kind of thing, I'm sure you're all familiar with that, and then you go to pose that character later, well, things are going to shift around a lot, and that can end up being a lot more work than if you just started in pose from the very beginning. It really depends on the character, but for this one, it was better to start symmetrically. And of course, even with something simple like this, some things are bound to break when I start posing. I make a lot more changes to the pose from here, including some proportional changes like the head being too large, but for the most part, we are nearing the end. From here, I jump down to the leaf skirt to start adding more variation there, and I do a pass on, well, just about everything on the character in a similar manner in an attempt to break up the silhouette more and just make sure nothing feels too inorganic. Some cleanup for the hands, they definitely needed it. I add fingernails later, pretty easy, just time consuming. Fix some proportions and weird anatomy, make sure everything is looking good there. One thing I really try to get across with these videos is that I jump around a lot on my characters. I don't just work on one area until I call it done, then work on another. I am constantly moving around the character and working on it as a whole. It's important to not get tunnel vision while you're sculpting. Otherwise, you're just gonna end up with everything out of proportion, looking super wacky, and then you're just gonna have to spend a ton of extra time fixing all that, and well, that's no fun. Then it's back up to the face for more sculpting there. Oh man, this face. This face, she was giving me some trouble. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I really liked a lot of the different stages of this character's face as I developed it, and because of that, I wanted to bring in a lot of those elements to the final piece. Sculpting characters is a little bit like a treasure hunt in a way. You have all these clues in your reference, and you use those to slowly build up the foundation and structure and so on, solving one clue at a time, until finally you find the character underneath. It's a process, and some of the puzzles are a little harder to solve than others. Some don't even have solutions and you have to improvise, but it's always fun when you get to the end of the string of clues and find that treasure at the end of the hunt. I wanted to create a simple environment for this character to try spicing up the render. Along the way, I found a pretty cool process to quickly create some grass using noise. For those that are interested, you can check out my settings here. Now, I don't end up using this for the grass, I instead use fiber mesh. Those trees in the background also go away. I wanted to keep things simple, and they also detracted too much from the final character. I find that every time I make any kind of environment for a character, I prefer it when it just stands alone, just the character by itself, because that is where I want your attention. But I think storytelling is important, and you can bring in a bit more of that through an environment. Some finishing touches here, working on polishing, making sure everything is where I want it, fixing last minute things. This is within the last couple hours or so of working on the character, and then we'll be heading on over to the render. A lot of people have been asking about my process for that lately, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about it. I use automatic UVs here in ZBrush, create textures from poly paint, or just display the vertex color in my render engine if the mesh is too dense for an auto UV map. And then I export everything to Blender depending on material breakup. So here is my render setup in Blender. You can see my new grass below at her feet, as well as the lights surrounding her. I always start with what is called a 3-point studio lighting setup, which you can find more information on with a quick Google. I won't go into the details here, it'll take too long to talk about, and I've mentioned it in many videos in the past. So I start with that 3-point lighting setup, and then I expand from there. So currently there are 7 lights in this scene. You have to be very careful that things don't get super blown out in flat though. Lighting is 90% of rendering for me. I can't really say these are the values you should use for this or where you should place your lights, because that will always be dependent on what you are lighting. And also the mood that you're going for is completely dependent on light intensity and placement and even color. I somewhat like my characters like they are products because that is, well, kind of my background. I professionally work on toys, and some of that happens to come through here. Now for the part that so many skip to, those beautiful final renders. Hello skippers! But hey, if you like what you see, I think you'll also really enjoy learning more about the process. Consider going back through and giving it a watch if you did just so happen to skip here to the end. Either way, thanks for checking out my work. I think it's always fun to look back at the development of your character and how far you've come since the beginning. So here is a small time lapse of the simple block out where everything started with this Cervitaur. I think it's cool to see, especially when it's right next to these final renders. I wanted to take a quick moment here in this video. I know a lot of you have been watching for a long time, and I don't just mean this video's length, even though it is a longer one, but I wanted to thank all of you that have been watching for a while, especially all those that have ever commented something nice or shared my videos. It means a lot, and I really appreciate you guys. I love making these videos, and I hope that you get something out of it. So yeah, thank you. And hey, if you are new around here, consider hitting that subscribe button. It helps the channel out a lot, and it helps me out a lot. I spend a lot of time working on characters like the one in this video, and it's hard to know if anyone will ever even watch it. So thank you. I appreciate you watching until the end. If you're looking for some more knowledge on digital sculpting, or maybe some brushes and other goodies, check out gumroad.com/Follygon. If you're looking to really level up, check out the Appeal Academy, my personal course and mentorship program. The link for all of that is down below in the description. And with that, I will say goodbye for now. You have a fantastic rest of your day, and I hope to see you in the next video.